Yeah, ho, Prof here, and we got another video for you coming. Hopefully you guys like some networking content. This video is not going to include configuration, but you'll get to see a big new toy that I got. If you are into mice and haven't checked it out, I got an hour-long video that probably goes over a bunch of stuff multiple times because it was very late or early. On the Inzone Mouse A, that's Sony's first mouse, made in collaboration with Fnatic. Played about an hour today with it. Quite good mouse. And at least on Amazon, it's already sold out. So either they didn't make that many, or all you bought them. So what we have for you guys is, you may have seen some content. I don't even know if I made content on it, but got a server from work. Yeah, there's backdoors of businesses for it. Just kidding. No, they're it was end of life, and they're like, hey, if somebody doesn't take this home, we're recycling it. And I'm like, free server? Free server? And it's a good thing I did that because temporarily, well, not temporarily, I needed a router. And I would have bought a Ubiquiti right out of the gate, like a Dream Machine Pro. However, a Dream Machine Pro can only switch 3.5 gigabit. The new internet I was going to be getting was 5 gigabit fiber requiring an SFP connection. I don't think I might be wrong, but Dream Machine Pro may or may not have in with SFP plus. So what I did in the meantime was put together a PF Sense box with that. It's like a, what is it, a R330, 330R. It's a Dell single 1U server. Bought some adapters, slapped a 10 gig, dual 10 gig NIC in, the X550, two ports. Yeah, here's an X550 one port. There can basically be on a port right there, and in and out with PF Sense. Makes sense. That was always meant to be a temporary solution, however. And thanks to recent power outage and power surge, I've bought the final solution because I knew that if I was able to get 5 or even 8 gigabit home internet, that Ubiquiti would sell a router that could switch and manage. A router that could switch, I guess, could route is the correct term there. I know they would make one that would do 5 gigabit and or higher, right? So there's like a Pro Ultra or Pro Max Ultra that is above this one that'll do 7.5 gigabit. I do not need that. I have 5 gigabit, and I really don't see myself going more than 5 gigabit unless something crazy happens, because right now at 5 gigabit we are hitting the issues of I only need 2 gigabit, 1 gigabit for what was a dedicated server hosted on the web because it had a gigabit fiber, and then we had 1 gig Spectrum at home, so I really only need the 2 gig. However, prior to, and since then this might have changed, but prior to TDS coming in, is lower than the 5 gigabit, you had to use their hardware. I don't want to do that. And if you took the price of my dedicated server plus the price of our old Spectrum plan, we were still under the cost of 5 gigabit fiber. So I said, fuck it. And got that instead. The other thing is I reached out to Wendell because he had made, this is a while ago now, this might be, we've been running that PF Sense server, I want to say for more than a year now. When did I ask Wendell if it was enough? Let me check here. From the Prophosys PF at Tech window. Latest. So that PF sense. PF. November 29th of 2023. So we are actually, here you go, because I will show you rather than talk over you guys. So here you go on Twitter. Wendell helping me out again like a goat. Was say son of a forbidden router. That's what I was using as my example, because he did forbidden router and then he did son of a forbidden router, which is like a little step down if you're just using it for a router, basically. Because he also was having issues switching these newer, faster fiber than what we were having. And then here's the thing, like he was recommending 12th gen at a minimum if you were buying it new. And I'm like, well, I have a like I if I have to, I will do that, because at the time there was no word about when Ubiquiti would come out with their newer, better, faster router. I mean, I knew at some point they would have to. So this is Skylake. That's like what? Haswell Broadwell 6th gen? Maybe? Alright, am I right with that? Xeons. 6000 HQ, that's laptop. Parts. Celeron. 6300 i3. Yeah, so 6. I was right, look at that. And it was like, I got kind of a you know, like, decent, like, he's recommending a 12th gen 6 core. I've got the E3 1240 V5. You know, and I said slap in a X710 or an X520. You know, oh yeah, for sure, popping in 10. Yeah, so he thought it was great because I, you know, like I'm like, here's what I have. If I can avoid building something new, I will. Ended up going with X550s after he made a separate video about them on how they're your best bet if you need a like multi-mode, not just 1/10 gigabit, but like 1, 2.5, 5, and 10 gigabit, like the modern 10 gigabit standard. That includes those other ones. I was wondering where my fiber adapters were. Little bitty fiber adapters. Hidden in the side. Yeah, wanted to see if he thought that was reasonable. So we've actually been using this PF Sense router out of that excuse me, because what are we in? We just hit September of 2025. So 2 months shy. Well, that would have been November 29th. So maybe max 3 months, because it would have been October 29th yesterday. Not October 29th, August 29th yesterday. So let's say 3 months shy of 2 years. Ran fine, never had an issue, rock solid. So if you guys don't want to buy hardware like this, which is going to make my life just way easier to manage, or you don't mind having a mixed environment, like I'm going from like literally every brand of my switches being different. This will be the 3rd time I've switched wireless access point brands. But now we're all standardizing on Ubiquiti, just because I much prefer, I'm paying the Ubiquiti tax. It's kind of how like sometimes people pay the Apple tax. I am paying the Ubiquiti tax. And when it gets up to either 2.5 gig PoE or 10 gig and or 10 gig PoE, and we're talking Ethernet here, not fiber. Stuff like the TP-Link Omada system ends up being not all that much cheaper than Ubiquiti. It's cheaper, but like we're talking hundreds of dollars cheaper, whereas it used to be thousands of dollars. Mostly because these other brands, either once you get up into the realm that I'm looking for, which, I mean, the switch I need is, it will eventually be like an enterprise hub switch. And in this case, like, we're getting into home, like, I would consider this prosumer, small business, and realistically with this, you get two of these, even, I mean, not even two, you get one. This could be medium business grade hardware. Dream Machine Pro Max switches with all of their filtering on and everything like that, all their monitoring. Dream Machine Pro Max right there. Dream Machine Pro Max, very Apple. It's how Ubiquiti is. And after getting another taste with their, they once again nailed it with their access points, for those wondering. Wi-Fi 6A, stupid expensive. Or sorry, 6E. Wi-Fi 6E. I always get 6, because on the Ethernet side it's 6A, but it was 5E. Wi-Fi side, it's 6E. Either way, initial 6 gigahertz. They didn't really have a proper option. Everybody else's, the cheapest other option was $600 an access point. Part of where Ubiquiti got into the small business and prosumer realm was the fact that their little circular access points were like a couple $100, rock solid, right? And they didn't have, unlike a lot of brands like Cisco, they don't have seats. You don't have to pay a revolving license. Yada, 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 yada. You know, it's like you buy this hardware, and like people knew it from their, you know, like their school or enterprise deployments, and they just buy one of those and they could feed their whole house off of one of these. Now with the being in a duplex and the house is very long shaped and different floors, and we want to get out the front of the house and the garage, I'm probably going to end up with 2 to 3 access points. Also, you have to remember the further we go from 2.4 to 5 to 6 gigahertz, less and less and less range. If you are more than one room away from your 6 gigahertz access point, same room, you'll have amazing performance. Next room over, better than 5 gigahertz performance. More than that rooms away, your phone's probably going to, unless you do what I do where I separate 2.4, 5, and 6, it'll probably drop back to 5 gigahertz. But basically I switched to Ubiquiti again when I went with their Wi-Fi 7 access points. We got one of them, temporarily hooked it up. Noticed that it had, let's just say, shit coverage, right? The other thing I had to do with this is running on my server is a Ubiquiti Docker that runs their management software. With this guy in existence, I will not have to run that Docker container because it's all be managed by the Dream Machine Pro Max. Not that it was any extra being on that Docker container. I probably won't delete the Docker. I'll just stop it from auto starting in case I do ever need it again. That way I don't have to set it all back up. Excuse me. But having that back and basically because I went from the Google access points, right? They still haven't made a Wi-Fi 7 variant, I believe. And their Wi-Fi 6A ones, which I got my grandparents, were very, very, very expensive. 6E, sorry. Wi-Fi 6E. Is it the Nest Pro? Comparatively to the older Nest. Or the Google Wi-Fi, which then became the Nest Wi-Fi. Have a bunch of friends and family that are very happy with all of those. Frozen Slate's parents, when they switched to TDS fiber, went to one of those as well, and he could just set it up with his phone, can monitor with his phone. That's why I like having it at my grandparents too. I can monitor all that. When I went to pfSense, not saying you can't add this, right? pfSense, very powerful, just like Linux, very powerful. However, with the access points being controlled by Ubiquiti's Docker, I could see what was on them. But I couldn't see what was on my pfSense router, and those two things wouldn't, like, talk to each other. Whereas if you get all Ubiquiti, or prior to that, we had all TP-Link. So for a bit there, I had a little TP-Link router, about yay big. They're like $100. Maybe 130 at most, and then 2 access points. Why did I switch to TP-Link? Because their 2.4 and 5 gigahertz small business access points were $100 flat, and they didn't require a PoE injection. They had, if you bought the light version, they could do PoE, but they came with an AC adapter. Like, knowing a lot of people that did those didn't do. So, like, on the low end, if you wanted, like, I used to install TP-Link all the time when I was doing on-site for small business, because their cloud, their Omada cloud, had a lot of the benefits of the Ubiquiti Unify system at a much lower price, as long as you are only doing gigabit speeds. Most places are still, I mean, a lot of places might not, in many cases, they might be still using 10/100 for a bunch of crap. Not that you can't do that. Phone's fine. Security cameras probably fine if you're sub HD, which cameras basically go infinitely, for those that don't know. Maybe not infinitely, but I've been supporting a system over 10 years, and as they need more cameras, you add more. We've had very few die over that time, and this is in a farm. Some of the places I supported to as a small on-site small business, we're still running decade-plus old camera systems. One of them was a Cisco, though, and we had to find that exact camera or very similar that would work with that same system, because you couldn't just import those into, like you could, like a Hikvision, which are also banned. And that's part of the reason why I personally also didn't invest in TP-Link anymore, is because they got banned by the US government for being, like, purposefully insecure, effectively. And the fact that when a close friend of mine out in Seattle, when he was redoing his house, and we did it all in 2.5 gigabit PoE, and he went with the Dream Machine Pro, because the Pro Max didn't exist yet. They only had gigabit fiber just over, so we're fine there. Once you start getting up in the 2.5 gig and 2.5 gig, especially 2.5 gig PoE, if you want to power all your cameras and your access points and stuff, the TP-Link stuff was like mere hundreds of dollars, like 200-300 max difference between running the Ubiquiti stuff than the TP-Link Omada. And if that's where you're at, even he knew about how nice it was to manage a Ubiquiti stack, like a full-on Ubiquiti rack. Looks nice and clean, very easy to work with. Not that the TP-Link Omada stuff or some of these other brands aren't that easy. But at a certain point, you're kind of willing to pay the premium. You know, it's like, why did people pay more for iPods than, say, a Creative Zen for iTunes? Kind of what you're doing here. So this is going to be the backbone of my whole network. I will be moving the access points over to here. The little guys that I pulled out are multi-gig fiber transceivers, RJ45. These are the 10 gig ones. This may change. All right, I need 2 for now, because I need, for now, I'm going to set it up exactly how the current pfSense boxes, which is 10 gig Ethernet in and 10 gig Ethernet out. Once I can get everything where it's supposed to go, I'm basically going to put a rack under my stairs, like a network rack. Well, a network rack and a server rack below, like probably a half rack and the network rack above it, mounted on the side of the wall or something. I'll have to figure that out. Or maybe one of the ones that, like the farm we got one that's hinged on the side. You know, but they'll be like rack, half rack on the bottom, full rack up top. You guys might have seen some previous videos where I showed off. The previous server that's currently running pfSense is not going away. Very useful, very happy. It might need a new power supply. In the original replacement ones that I ordered, one was bad, and I got my money back, but annoying. So for now, we're just going to do, I spent extra, and I got the, just because we're literally going to unplug the pfSense box, plug this in. Slot in, slot out sort of thing, right? Eventually, once I get the switch, which is going to be more than this router is, sadly, probably going to go fiber from this into that switch, and then from that switch out to other switches if I need other switches. The price difference between, it's like the Pro 24 Max, I think. It's 16 10 gigs and 8 2.5 gigs and 2 SFP plus 25 gigs. So I do, this says SFP plus 10 gig. I go out of here to the switch, and then everything would go into the switch. I think I have 8 Ethernet throughout each house, each room in the house. Those are going to go into 2.5 because it's actually Cat 5e, I believe, so, which should actually be able to do 2.5 gig. Technically, under very short runs, it can do 10 gig. Ain't gonna worry about that though, because anything that needs 10 gig, I will run a dedicated Cat 6a shielded solid core run, sometimes multiple. But between those, I might use fiber instead of, what is it, the detached copper, like for the really short runs. For now though, we're just gonna slot this right into where the pfSense box was, or still is currently, but won't be very shortly. Hardware kit. Make sure you don't lose these. Ooh, we got the braided power cable, black. Hardware kit, screws, rubber feet, etc. Gonna leave those in there until I rack it up. Rack mount ears. Don't lose those. I'm actually, Ubiquiti is probably not that bad. They're very accessible. I have had, though, if things use specific ears and you can't get them secondhand used, being quite expensive. Like here's where you get some of the Apple with this. That is like a locking, as far as I'm aware, a proprietary locking power jack. Right? Looks kind of like an iMac one, braided. Most brands aren't gonna put that time and effort in there. Also, that kind of takes away from a lot of places. They want to use like one side of the rack is one color, the other side of the rack is the other color, so you know that it's going, like your redundant power supplies are going to different UPSs. Or if you're routing, say like if you have 2 of these, because you can put these in redundant mode, you would want one going to one UPS, one going to the other UPS. If you have redundant switches as well, same sort of thing, plugged into both, but on different. So you need to color code that generally with your cabling. I'm not super into that side of thing on like your network infrastructure. Once again, I'm often in the place of, here's what we have, fix it, rather than set it up from scratch. So you guys can correct me on, if you're those kind of people, please. I also don't know a lot about what do you want to say? Like, correct as taught in school industry practices. All of my skills are learned on site, in practice, doing it. For better or for worse, you know. And a lot of it, if you're supporting other companies, a lot of it is supporting it without documentation. And that's where your following standard industry practices comes in handy, because then there's like a certain expected configuration, or you can, oh, if it's named that way, or if this is laid out this way, you can expect it to be a certain way, right? This thing is fucking heavy for how little a guy it is. This little guy compared to similar things we've unboxed on this channel. She's dense though. Like, this is, UPS is heavier because it's got a lead acid battery, but UPS is also bigger. Not as big as I thought it would be though, based on UPS is only this depth. It's a network depth UPS, whereas when we got the one for the farm's security system, had to get a rack that was specifically UPS depth. It was a UPS depth network rack because a lot of you are like, of course we're all this, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, UPSs are deeper generally than your network equipment. Yeah, so you're like, of course. And once again, this shows I often support existing installations or existing companies, or I might be able to give them suggestions on how that, like, what they should change, how they could improve it, yada 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 yada. A lot, and this is where my skill set of having to touch anything and everything comes in handy. You know what I mean? Because obviously, if their previous person was doing a good job, they wouldn't be coming to me or to my company. You know. Yeah, so it's just a normal plug in there. I wonder if other brands are compatible with the little locky thing. On the front, not something I necessarily plan to use. The only camera that I want, and maybe I'll set up with this, what I meant by that is these are hard drive bays. Are they locked out right now? That should pop. No? Normally that would pop it. Oh, you might have to put like a pin. I bet you have to like sim tool eject that. I'll have to read the manual, which you don't get, mind you, for those wondering. They just expect you to grab the latest one as a PDF. But these are for hard drives. You only get 2 of them. If you need more than that, I believe these are specifically for the stuff that is like your security system stuff, your cameras, your all that sort of stuff. We ain't got any of that around here, at least Ubiquiti wise. If anything, the only thing that I really want is I will want, once I'm back up in the office, I'll want one over my desk, because the number of times that I forget something and immediately want to know if I just left it at home and didn't put it in my bag, and like look at my like little tray where I put my wallet and keys and pens and knives and stuff like that, to freak out. And you're like, wait, you'd buy a camera just to look at that? Yes, I would. A common thing too is to have one over the network equipment. Like if you have a camera or a security system, especially if it's one that's like network optimized, yada yada yada, you would put one of the cameras pointing at the door that leads to the area, and ideally just covers the door and covers the actual rack. That way you can log people accessing it. Like if you were doing that in a business and they had a security system, I would always recommend, like, hey, add one for this, you know. That way you can see if somebody was poking at shit they shouldn't be. over on this side. 2x maybe? Let's see if we can. There you go. I forget about all these. These guys are, though, 2.5 gig Ethernet input. That's what you'd get from your cable modem, more than likely. Even when I had the gigabit Spectrum, it had 2.5 gig out of the recommended modems. Technically, I believe our area is actually wired for 2 gig Spectrum. But like I think Spectrum wired to our city wasn't, or something like that. That's why we didn't get. I don't think Spectrum still has like a nationwide 2 gig. Ever since they bought Charter and Time Warner, I think Charter technically bought Time Warner Cable and then they made Spectrum. Ever since then they've been like trying to wait to do anything regionally until it's all rolled out nationally for whatever reason. But then we have our 10 gig SFP Plus right there. That is where one of those adapters is going to go in to make it a 10 gig Ethernet. And that is our internet in. You can see a little internet guy. And then we have the 10 gig out. Same thing for now. That's going to be using that adapter. Eventually, once I get my Ubiquiti switch, I will probably be changing that to fiber directly into the switch, just to keep it simpler, because then you don't have to have the transceiver overhead. And not that there should be anything there, but it'd be easier just to do the direct attach copper, chunk done. You're not using the Ethernet. Oh, maybe you are technically. You guys can correct me on that one too. There should be less overhead though. Less conversion of. I mean, not that should affect anything, but then I think some of these are something. That's my answer to that. I should probably go and look it up because I don't remember. I think some of those are 2.5 gig. I don't think any of them are 10 gig. Let's wake up the PC over here. Why did I get this one, you might be asking. You don't even know the specs of the switches. Why did you even get this one? Well, the Pro Max, lowest one that does the 5 gigabit switching. Switch Pro XG24 is what I'm looking for the Switch. Oh, and then there was a Dream Machine Special Edition too. That was one that had like a little bit more than the Dream Machine Pro, but not really. Something else annoying about Ubiquiti that they kind of started doing on their really high-end stuff is getting rid of this. This is their USB connect. That is for their battery backup. So instead of just using a normal UPS, they have to use like their own proprietary nonsense. I doubt I'll ever go that far. And I even recommended to my buddy who recently, probably a year or so ago, put in a full stack, is just use a normal UPS, because then you can get everything on it rather than the one for this being proprietary. Okay, 8 RJ. It looks like they're just gigabit, so next to useless for my needs. 8 1 gig ports on the front. Don't even know what I would use those for. Yeah, legitimately, don't even know. Yeah, NVR hard drive bays, built-in 128 gig SSD, ARM Cortex something, or 8 gigs RAM. I'm pretty sure some of this you can tinker with a little bit yourself. They really don't want you to, but you can. Yeah, the SFP Plus is 10 or 1 gig. That is why I bought the 10 gig adapters. Luckily, coming in from my it's not a modem. Fiber gateway, fiber something, I forget what it is. It's a Nokia. That either has 1 gig, I think it has 2.5 gig ports, 4 of them, and then a 10 gig. So we're gonna go 10 gig in. So this 1 or 10 adapter, brilliant. And then the switch I'm going to is a 10 gig. So brilliant. 10 in, 10 out. Even though it's a 110, you know, like the older style, because it's SFP plus. Happy. And then if I get that high-end switch I was talking about, that XG Pro XG24, that's a 25 gig SFP plus. So we'd have to go in the settings of it and lower it to a 10 gig probably, unless it'll natively figure shit out. Okay, open VPN. We got WireGuard. Open VPN. WireGuard is much L2TP vomits. Sick of setting those up. So yeah, not port layout 8. Yeah, these are just the 1 gigs. So worst case, like I said, I have. If I don't care, and we'll see. This actually does, now I think about it, help me out a little bit. Right now I'm using all 8. We are maxed out of all 8 10 gig ports on my 10 gig switch. 2 of those are the APs. One of those is to go is in from the switch from the current PFSense router. One of those is out from the switch to a 1 gig switch that I would like to eliminate. It's a dumb switch, like a non-managed switch. The port count was getting very tight with only 16 gig or 16 10 gigs. That's enough, because remember I said I'm at 8 right now, but there will be more once everything gets correctly orientated. And do I really need the 2.5 gig going to each room though? Probably not. Most of the stuff is just like the TV, which uses like your the Shield TVs and stuff like that. So there's a good chance that unless it's a specific device, 1 gig is probably enough. So I may use these 8 right here for the internal house, you know, like the Cat 5e that's in the wall. That way I can have, I need 3 of those 2.5 gigs to go to the access points, PoE to the access points, right? So that would make it much more manageable, rather than having to steal the 10 gig ones. So we'll see if that's required. I'd much prefer to do the more future-proof thing and already have 2.5 gig in the wall. But this may be what prevents me from having to buy a second switch. Now I shouldn't say a second, like, you know, like layer switch. Because I may, I forget what they're called. They're not endpoint switches, but they're not, maybe node switches. It's like the ones where, like, you have the 10 gig coming out of here. It ends up someplace else. It splits out to multiple, like 1 gigs or 2.5 gigs or even 10 gigs, as long as everything isn't managing or isn't hitting it all at the same time. It'll be fine. What do they call it? They have some that are PoE powered even. You know, there's like a little 8-port guys, or even 4-port guys. So there may be cases where that'll have to happen, as in, like in the home theater setup, I will want a dedicated 10 gig line going to the home theater PC, right? So I can talk to the server all like fancy like, right? All powerful like. And then, but everything else needs Ethernet in there. Might not make. I probably will have one for the TV. I may or may not connect it because I've already made it so it can't get on Wi-Fi, and it hasn't had LAN since I've moved it to the concrete wall, so it hasn't updated to the newer LG control version. I'm much happier with it because I saw what they did with that, and you have to agree to certain like sharing and stuff, even though I don't use the smart part of it. The receiver actually quite nice if I could get that on wired Ethernet. Switch, or not switch, Shield TV. Hopefully the Switch 2, they make a new one since the new stuff's out, right? Switch 2, right? That's like 4 already. So I don't want to drop like that many Ethernet lines. Like I want to do it 2 at most. Depending on the cost, I may do 1, because there's one that has like 1 10 gig in, 1 10 gig out, and all the rest are either like 2.5 gig or something. So I might do that because that would get the 1 pass through to the home theater PC, and then the rest have lower tiers. And as long as the home theater PC isn't slapping that at the same time as everything else is, we're happy. You're like, oh, can you even do 10 gig? Yes, we can. We're regularly using NFS anywhere from 800, 880 megabytes per second up to 900 plus, right? If I were to use SMB, which is highly unreliable in Unraid, I can smash the gigabit flat because all of my stuff I was running either Windows 11 Pro for workstations or Windows 11 Enterprise. So it has all of the multi-threading capabilities, all of the everything you would need. Like if you're going to Windows Server, it would smash that all the time. Hopefully, like I haven't updated to the new version of Unraid. Hopefully they fixed SMB. I feel like it's like I've been having issues like just browsing through files on SMB and Unraid is untenable. That's why I switched to NFS. Also, there will be times where you will get full-on gigabit speed, and then other times where you get 1 megabyte a second. 1. And it'll just like be like that. And then sometimes if you like restart stuff, it'll be happy. Other times you restart stuff and it's exactly right back where it was. Other times it takes so long to negotiate a connection that the map drive doesn't mount properly. Yeah. Or to other times too, it'll just be like, oh yeah, you can't just on this device, you just can't access that SMB share off of Unraid, even though on another device you can. Or sometimes it'll work on Wi-Fi and then not on wired, and you're like, what? This is why I want to kind of get everything manageable through one interface, so it's much easier to troubleshoot that sort of stuff. My fix for that on Unraid, though, realistically has been just use NFS, which is annoying, though, because I use I have a lot of Unicode stuff. You've seen my Japanese music, anime collection, etc. A lot of that tends to not be English Latin characters. And you're like, what? NFS supports that? Yeah, but Windows NFS client doesn't. See, and Windows has also updated the NFS server, because they want to be able to select the server as a whole version newer of NFS than the client. The server is also a whole version of NFS behind the current version of NFS still. So, the NFS client is ancient, and I don't see them fixing it anytime soon. There's also that stuff with like the open source SMB project that was being worked on by Google. If I recall, during all the firings years back, like 2022 and later, they let go the guy that was working on that on their team, the guy that was heading up the SMB, open source SMB. So also people out there gaslighting me and many others on the Unraid forums as well as some other places about the issues with SMB and how slow it. And they're like, no, it's not slow. You just got something configured wrong. We definitely do not. What it happens to actually be is if you have a proper network connection and backbone, and you actually provide it with, like, I have a pair of, was it 980 Pro 1 terabytes as cache drives? Those can saturate 10 gig, no problem. If we're doing it in like a VM hosted on the device, even if it's happening through SMB that is on the device, right? Like, so it's like a VM hosted, and the share is hitting the SMB share from Unraid that is inside the device. I'll hit 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 gigabit. Easily. Like, I do this nightly, right? It's once we start actually switching that out to stuff, right? And then it just like falls apart. So, and I to be truthful, like, I had enough time to figure it out, diagnose it. It didn't fix it for me. Everything I did, like, other people who are running higher, say like higher end setups, but actually have like properly fully configured 10 gigabit setups, correct drivers, correct firmware. You have fast enough hardware, because some other people are saying, oh, your CPU and your server's not fast enough. We're running a 5900X in there now, 64 gigs of RAM, which is the max I could get done with ECC at the time in DDR4. Like it's a pretty kitted out. I mean, like, there's better stuff out there, obviously. I could use some more cores even now still. Actually, I'm running out of RAM now before I'm running out of cores. Because of how the hypervisor for the VMs works. It's not like ESXi or Proxmox, where you can actually, like, the variable RAM, like if you say, like, oh, max out at 8 gigs, but then only use as much as you actually need, it doesn't work right, because of the hypervisor that they're using. And maybe some of that can or will be fixed, because like at work we switched from ESXi, vSphere, vCenter, the whole thing, to Nutanix. Fuck, I forget what it's called. Some of you might know. I should know, because I spent weeks on it helping with that transition. But my mind is blank, smooth. And what ended up, what I found interesting is the hypervisor, as far as I can tell, is based on the same thing that the hypervisor in Unraid is based on. Because the tool installation was very, 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 very similar. So maybe we'll get some with like, Wendell actually talked about it, where a bunch of companies are switching, like he mentioned, that companies were switching from Nutanix, or from VMware, to Nutanix's implementation, and it's becoming much more competent, because, like, they didn't have a reason to build it out before, because nobody was using it, because they just run VMware on it. But now people are, because they don't want to pay. Let's just put it this way. The stuff you may or may not have heard of, things going up 600% to 1,000%. Yes. They went and added a 0 to our thing. If you want, like imagine you have a $10 bill, and now it's a $100 bill, except much higher up. And that's when we're like, oh, how about not? Like, it has to, think about that, is it had to be worth multiple people's labor for like many weeks to transition this to Switch, right? So hopefully, for me, this is going to be, and this is how I've seen with people's Ubiquiti setups, is much like my Google one was for quite some time, where I just put it in, set it up, and didn't touch it. That's what this is going to become once I can fully implement it with the right hardware, right? And now then I'll have a proper backbone, proper monitoring. When maybe I can dip my toes back into why Unraid's SMB configuration, or like SMB, let's say configuration implementation is such shit. Like Linus has talked about it before, how like, oh, Unraid's speeds and stuff are horrible. It's Unraid's SMB implementation, not Unraid itself. I mean, like, there is some stuff with Unraid itself because you're capped at the speed of a single drive. Like, you know, because you're not actually like raiding them together, right? That's why it's called Unraid. Very convenient. Like, I have a 4 terabyte drive in there. I literally just put my VMs on there. That's because it's a 7200 RIPM drive. And you're like, why don't you put them on a cache drive? Oh, I do. But that drive is the more they live for the ones that aren't active and on the cache drive. Otherwise, how caching works in Unraid is it has to go back to the pool at some point, right? So they go back on that drive. Like when I swapped out the cache drives that I just killed that were 860 EVOs, 500 gig drives, they were used in a server as boot or OS or cache. I'm not sure, but somebody harmed them. They were not happy boys before I started using them. But warranty was the 300 terabytes written, and I wrote them. I started getting errors around 450 terabytes written, and there was still a bit over 10% health left on them. But in the recent week, they've been throwing more and more errors, and I'm like, okay, we got to finally go swap them. And of course, I put a pair of somewhat worn 850 EVOs in there that are 250 gigs. So those are definitely going to last longer. And I had to, basically, all I had to do to swap this is swap it instead of writing to the cache drives, swap it to write to the pool. And then hit move, and it moved the VMs off the cache drives back to the pool. And then I went and removed that pool of 860 EVOs, added a new pool of 850 EVOs, set that pool for the VMs, and then it put them on there. I did have to resize them a little bit because I thought I had made it small enough, but I forgot after formatting and yada 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 that also that you don't want to be running, you want at least 10% free on a drive. What did I size down to, like 200 gigs of the 250? You know, after overhead of ZFS, and then you're 10% free, so you don't run into, you know, save you overhead space. About 200 is what I got out of it. That same VM, I want to say, was closer to 220 or so. I thought I had sized it small enough on the 500 gig drives so that they could just transfer to the 250s, but of course my math was wrong. Because I knew these drives were dying. Basically, like they were already half dead when I slapped them in there, right? I just finally threw in the recycling today, but when they start throwing ZFS errors, and then when you wake up and they start throwing multiple a day, yeah, it's time to get them out before you actually start losing data. As much as ZFS was correcting it. So hopefully this guy, you know, when I was saying, like, why would it work on the same device, like SMB sharing to the Unraid, was working via wireless, same subnet, by the way, but wireless and not wired to the same device, like the same Windows device. That's insane. Maybe I can track some of that now that the Windows stuff or the wireless stuff will be managed by this, because I will move those access points over to this, and the wired stuff, once I get that pretty set on the Pro XG24, it's like $1,000 switch. If I wanted the PoE one, and like say if you had a ton of stuff that required PoE, or even just like with the 8 2.5 gig ones, like say you needed those for all 4K and bigger cameras, or you say you had all of them hooked up to Wi-Fi 7 access points or something. I only need 3. I'm probably just gonna run PoE injectors. Figure out a way to mount those up nicely, you know, to be able to go out of the switch, into the injector, out of the injector, into the patch panel, you know, out of the patch panel, into wherever. I'm sure somebody might have like a 3D printed thing, and since my 3D printer is up and running at the father's place, have my younger brother run it. That's a hobby I don't even have to learn anymore. Not that I don't want to, but you know, got enough shit going on. You know, probably a big video about a lot of nothing for all you guys, but yeah, if you have any questions, comments on how you think I should lay this out, you know, please let me know. I think now that I have these 8 1 gig ports on here, if I have to run some of the house stuff on that, I can. I'm gonna properly run everything to patch panels, so I can, you know, like move everything around as needed, label everything up. I know the horrors of not doing that, that's for sure. Because that was my everyday for a while. Yeah, so, you know, let me know if you've got experiences running, you know, 10 gig plus. Because I can tell you, prior to switching to Unraid, I ran 10 gig off of not even like Windows Server. That was Windows Pro for workstations. Because in Windows 10 era, you had to have either Windows Server or Pro for workstations. Maybe Enterprise. I think it was only Pro for workstations for certain multi-threaded 10 gig stuff, right? I forget which term it is, but it's a way of doing like SMB multi something. So that might not be in, like I'm like 1 version behind on Unraid. Maybe that'll fix it up with the newer version. On my main server though, I am really reluctant to do a major version upgrade, being that otherwise, and living with NFS, it's been happy, you know. So this guy is probably going to go to the new version, major version of Unraid first. That's the backup server, and I'll just build it right out of the gate on that version and see how it does. It's only gonna, I don't know if I'm gonna slap a 10 gig adapter in it. I definitely could. I just showed you there's 2 up on the shelf, so I've got them. But because where it will eventually go and live, not here, because I want it to be a remote backup. You know, this is going to make my life easier. Not that I couldn't have done a VPN with pfSense, but this will make it easier for sure, because I already know how to do it on Ubiquiti. It's the same thing, like, how do you want to put this? Proxmox, I would say, is a very similar capabilities-wise hypervisor to VMware. The only reason why a coworker started learning it, though, is with all the VMware licensing stuff, right? And if you're used to doing it one way, you know, the way that Proxmox lays it out compared to VMware is different. Like, similar to doing things in Windows and Linux. Like, if you know how to do it in Windows, you might even spend a little bit more to just continue to do it that way, right? Same thing with, you know, this is, a lot of their stuff is like, maybe not one click. And the fact that you have to go between UIs, like there's definitely things back when I was doing on-site stuff where the fix to it was going to go out of the new UI to the old UI because they hadn't yet added the option that I needed to change to the new UI yet. So you had to go between them. A horrible experience, Ubiquiti. Horrible. But it's very, also, if you're an MSP and you need to manage these, you can have one account that handles it all, right? Same thing with like the TP-Link Omada and stuff like that as well. But I do have, if you guys need a TP-Link router, I still have my gigabit router and 2 APs. I think 2. I might have sold one off. But I was trying to think there for a second. That I always had to run as a Docker, because in the case of TP-Link, their little router guy couldn't act as like, this acts like a cloud key, basically managing all your devices. The TP-Link router couldn't do that. The other thing I ran into, and I didn't even consider this to be a thing, because I'm like, 10 gig Ethernet thing plugged into 10 gig Ethernet thing in the switch, managed switch, shouldn't even be hitting the router. When I'm doing that, but that thing just doesn't have enough overhead. And it turns out with it in the chain that it, I mean, we managed to actually have decent Wi-Fi, surprisingly. I shouldn't say surprisingly, but those TP-Link guys actually had really good 2.5 gig, 5 gig, and that router would be fine for anybody who is upwards of gigabit. You know what I mean? They're not trying to do like a multi-gig internal network. Like you're sticking with gigabit in your house. Here's the thing, though, guys. Remember, we were talking about 200 megabytes a second a hard drive would do. And that's not like a dual head actuator one, like just like a big drive. Like an original 8 terabyte archive drive from Seagate could do 200 megabytes a second read. Sadly, 100 or less write. I still have a couple of those 8 terabytes in my array, and man, do they slow it down. So that's something I might try to... if the backup server ends up needing more storage, I may pull the 8 terabyte. It's kind of like when we need an upgrade, like Frozen Slate. His drives, in his home theater PC stopped showing up as SATA drives. He had 2, and I think he ran them in RAID 0. Those used to be drives from his desktop. They both died in the home theater PC. And they literally aren't even show up as hardware anymore. So what we decided on doing is, hey, your desktop has a like a 1 gig boot drive and a 2 gig, actually 1 gig and 2 gig, 1 terabyte boot drive and a 2 terabyte like secondary. What if we replace one of those two with a 4 terabyte, and you take the 2 terabyte out of there and huck it in the home theater PC, which he's also using as his race sim rig. That's actually like a common thing that happens, because they're already over there and they're beefy. So then you get your desktop an upgrade, and your other computer that has a broken part gets fixed. Or you can think about it this way, like, oh, you want to upgrade your desktop? Well, then technically your secondary or thirdary computer also gets an upgrade, because it can pass the components down. See, that's the kind of justification we smart people that definitely don't have problems can do. So what I might be able to do is to get some of those 8 terabyte, like there might be 3 left in the my main server. Maybe they can go on that guy, right? And then those can be replaced with, like, don't use 14 terabytes. We've already run into this. 12. I've been doing 20s. And I actually have 2 already. So that it depends on how much that ends up with backup storage space. And if that's enough, because like I'm not going to back up just the regular seasonal anime and stuff like that. But I put so much time into my music collection that is getting backed up. All of the documents, I have terabytes and terabytes of pictures back from when I was more into photography and when I go on trips. That is the one time I still get the camera out, and oh my god, do real cameras look good? And when I mean real cameras, I mean either DSLR, mirrorless, and I'm still using I have my T3i. The pictures on that thing still looked amazing. And then now I've got a Panasonic G7, but now I have a G85, I believe. I'm very happy with it. I have 3 primes, brilliant. And the pictures out of that are the video too. The video out of this guy that you're seeing, the Pixel 9 Pro, is getting better and better, and the pictures have as well. But still, there's something about, and I've used some full frame ones. I've done, 35 millimeter film as well. Oh my gosh, taking with that, if it was less effort, oh, just looking through the viewfinder on that, like, you don't mind manually focusing. It's brilliant. But I have tons of stuff like that. I got all the YouTube videos. This is an hour now. That's 20 gigs or something. That adds up over time. So all that sort of stuff. I want to have a duplicate over there. And it's actually multiple versioning as well. Because what we ran into with the server recently is, though I could recover things from Backblaze, I didn't know what I had lost. Also, I didn't know when I lost it. So I eventually just had to recover everything and overwrite it to the latest version that predated drives dying, which did work. I think I still have a list of things I lost that I found later, right? But still not as good as if I had, like, let's put it this way, like, say you know what folders or what parts of folders you got to restore, right? Rather than, because I didn't know what was on that drive that died, I just had to restore everything, which took way longer than just grabbing the 8 terabytes that was on the potential maximum of 8 terabytes that was on there and restoring that. I could have done that with I think 4 terabytes is the maximum Backblaze lets you do on an external hard drive. I could have done 2, and they allow you to do 2 hard drives or 2 like shipments of data a year. I could have done the entirety of that drive had I known what folders were affected or what directories or what, no problem. Whereas I eventually had to just download it all, which downloading easy. I gig with Spectrum at the time, so I'm pulling it down basically as fast as they'll give it to me. The other issue, though, is I'm having to store it, because how they give it to you is in these multi-part chunk zip files that you then have to extract, so you need enough space to download them, but then you need enough space to extract them as well. Whereas had I just gotten that delivery of that external hard drive, wouldn't have had to do that. So otherwise, I am liking Unraid. It is, if they can make, like, the downside always of TrueNAS, and that is that they don't have that ability to have different size drives without losing a crap ton of space. Now they're developing whatever that ZFS version is, and HexOS, which is being funded by TrueNAS to be like an easier interface. I believe either HexOS or TrueNAS is funding that version of ZFS. Then that might be time to change, but it's going to have to be developed and working before I slap that on my main server, right? And at that point in time, I would wait until I have to build a new one. And right now I'm hearing a lot of trouble with Zen 5, not Zen 5, it'd be Zen 5 for servers, but the AM5 for servers. Just like weird PCI Express stuff, whereas AM4, cheapest chips, and just works. And you can slap ECC memory in there. Like I said, the only thing, I could use some more cores, but I could go to a 5950X. Maybe once this guy gets changed out, I can borrow its CPU, or once one of my friends ditches their 5950X, we can buy that for the server. But then the real limitation there, every now and then I do hit some CPU stuff, but it's mostly thread limitations. I'm hitting the max of a thread, not all the threads. So maybe there's some management that'll come with some updates that'll help with that. But now I'm running into 64 gigs is not enough for all the VMs I'm running if I want to run them all at the same time. So I often have to shut ones down in order to start other ones up. However, getting DDR4 ECC that's compatible with that to that density, and when I thought I had bad DDR4, when turns out the memory errors I was getting was actually the SSD drives in ZFS. That's memory, right? I guess. We'll see if it goes away now that those drives are swapped. but because I tested the memory with memtest, passed with flying colors, all the passes. So it's not the system, it's not the actual memory, or at least it shouldn't be. I'm not saying memtest can't be wrong, but unlikely. So I'm gonna get this put in. Gertrude just showed up because it's probably time to sit down. Yeah, normally at 2 I'm already watching anime with the Kit Kats, right? But I want to get this in. So I may or may not adopt. I might put it in and just not adopt the wireless access points tonight. Depends how far I want to get. Oh, you coming over here? Yeah, it looks like you're coming over here. Because I don't necessarily want to knock out the Wi-Fi just yet. So, questions, comments, suggestions, please. The suggestions, like I said, I am by no means perfect with networking. I'll admit that. I know enough to be dirty. I even not even that. Like I can get things done both at work and at home. You know. Do I know enough to, like, some of the simple stuff is what ended up fixing my network was getting rid of 10-plus-year-old patch cables. Making sure not to make them into circles. Like, you just droop them, or you need to do figure eights. But, you know, like correct length patch cables is even better. But just, like, buying new ones and also having things in the right order, realizing that TP-Link router that is designed for gigabit traffic was actually holding up my internal stuff to some extent somehow. Still never tracked down why or how. But the current setup of the network is insane and crappy. But it's working great. So my thought is if it works great, when I do it properly, it's going to work the same or greater. And with this guy, I'll be able to manage that better. And at least know what's going on, report it, like how much upload traffic a month, how much download, what devices are hitting, are they, like, what bands are they using. I can start doing VLANs. You're like, you could have done that all with pfSense. Yes, I could have. It's going to be way easier, in my opinion, to do that with Ubiquiti once all my hardware is Ubiquiti. It like I said, I want ideally a like prosumer set and forget that I can monitor remotely. And I'll get that with this. Not that I couldn't have set that up for free with pfSense and a bunch of other shit. But there's a reason why I spent $700 between that and those to get this when I had a perfectly working pfSense install. You know, this along with the other hardware is just going to make my time and life easier, cleaner. Yeah, that's why we have the UPS as well. This is going, for now, this is going to be the only other thing. You're like, wait, you bought a 1200 watt UPS for this little guy that's like 100 watts? No. That's going to be for all the networking hardware. And actually, there might end up being 2 of them, because eventually that guy and the main server will also be on them. So for now, though, yes, because this needs a UPS. That is what just killed a surge protector. Like, we just had a surge and a power outage that killed the surge protector that the current Dell server was plugged into, that's running running the pfSense. That the power supply in there, the original one that I put back in, still grumpy after that. Not fully, it's not dead. It's still working. It's at least not shutting off. But hopefully we can alleviate it by just, because why fix the old thing that was supposed to be a temporary fix that lasted just shy of 2 years? Why fix that when I can actually buy the thing that was originally intended in the first place? hopefully you enjoyed that talk on infrastructure and networking and my ideas slash ideals around that. If you guys want to learn around networking and stuff like that, get yourself an old server, or maybe running pfSense as a VM. I don't know if I do that on Unraid. I'd probably go the route of Proxmox. It's like a much lower hypervisor. That's why I was talking about that. I don't know if I dipped back into that at any point, but that's why we were bringing up like VMware and Proxmox versus something like the hypervisor in Unraid. I felt much safer just slapping pfSense on that entire server than it as a VM. You're going to need more overhead, basically. That's where Wendell was saying you want to get the 6-core 12th gen at a minimum rather than the 12 600K instead of 12 400K, basically, because you're going to be using those other cores for either other things or just the hypervisor in general. So, like I said, I obviously have used pfSense for nearly 2 years now. Been happy with it. But we're finally able to go to, and we had a reason to go back to the original plan. Sadly, it's not going to go in the rack right away because that area doesn't exist yet. We're crawling to our end goal. Crawling. I mean, hey, look at my little cart. The top of that is finally cleaned off. Is the stuff that was on there put away yet? No. But it's not on the cart.